Good morning, TILLI friends. I'm Deb Mandel, and I serve on TILLI's Events Committee. It's great to be with you today. We'll engage in a fascinating exploration of the Ruth R. Marder Center for Matisse Studies at the Baltimore Museum of Art. This program follows our fascinating meeting with Christopher Gorham, who spoke last week at Temple Israel about his latest work, Matisse at War. Christopher did his research at the BMA. Katy Rothkopf, the Anne and Ben Cone Memorial Director of the Ruth R. Marder Center for Matisse Studies and Senior Curator of a European Painting and Sculpture, will give a PowerPoint presentation on the collecting habits of siblings Claribel and Etta Cone. These two sisters from Baltimore assembled one of the most important collections of European Impressionist and Post-Impressionist art in the United States. Over a period of 50-plus years, these two sisters changed the course of art collecting in America. We will also be treated with a short preview of three noteworthy Matisse exhibitions opening this March at the BMA. Following the presentation, Katy and Laura Albans, Curatorial Research Associate, will give a virtual tour of the Ruth R. Marder Center for Matisse Studies. The center opened in December 2021, establishing a new space solely dedicated to the study of the French artist Henri Matisse. It serves as a major resource for scholars, students, and artists alike, and shines a spotlight on the largest and most comprehensive collection of works, over 1,500, by Matisse in a public institution. The tour will show the center's comprehensive library and will have some of Katy's and Laura's favorite Matisse works on paper on view. Thank you, Laura and Katy, for creating today's program, Emma Glazer and Erin Markham for logistics, and Deborah Seidel and Priscilla Golding for your guidance. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for these. Okie doke.
Good morning, everyone. I hope it's a little bit warmer where you are than where we are, but I doubt it. Thanks so much for spending this late morning time with us. And thank you, Deb, for organizing this. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about the Cone sisters today, who put together, as Deb said, one of the greatest collections of European modern art in this country. I've been very lucky for the last 26 years to be the steward of their collection here at the BMA. When I arrived in January of 2000, our galleries were emptied out as we were reinstalling the entire collection with new architecture. We expanded the space, we changed the lighting, we changed the floors, we made it a completely different experience, really kind of tried to elevate it. And I think it's been very successful. So we can, as you can see, my talk is really about the Cone sisters. Next slide, Laura. And here we see them as young gals in Baltimore. The elder sister was Claribel Cone, who was a medical doctor in the very sort of first generation of female doctors in this country. When she went to medical school in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins did not accept female students, so she couldn't go there, but she went to a school known as the Baltimore Women's Medical College. I don't know how many students there were. And Claribel, at a certain point, became the president of it. So she was very intellectual, very smart, very confident. Her younger sister, Etta, who we see on the left, didn't go past high school. And when her parents, once she sort of was in her early 20s, she had not married, had not expressed any interest in getting married. So it was her job to sort of hang around with mom and dad and keep them going in their elder years, which of course we all today would very much like for ourselves. Next slide, please. Here we see their parents, Herman and Helen and Herman Cone, playing cards. They were from a very tight-knit German Jewish community here in Baltimore. Herman emigrated from Germany and started business first in Tennessee, He started a wholesale business, as many folks did in those days. And they had a very large family with 10 kids. And so the two eldest sons worked for dad, and they were the ones who were going up and down the East Coast from Tennessee up past Baltimore selling goods. And at a certain point, they said to him, we'd make a lot more money if we actually made things as opposed to selling other people's things. So at a certain point in, I think it was 1897, they began the Cone textile business, where they made denim, primarily denim and corduroy. And the company became moved from, well, the textile company was based in North Carolina. So a lot of the family moved to North Carolina to work in the family business. But the Cohn sisters and their youngest brother stayed here in Baltimore. I'm showing this photo of the parents. We don't have very many photos of them, but I also wanted you to look at the interior and see how it was not a place where there was a lot of art on the walls. I think there are a couple of, maybe a little framed print of a landscape and maybe a family photo. But the Cohns were not art collectors. Their parents were not art collectors. This was something that was really their passion. Next slide, please. So here we see them a little bit older, with Claribel in her physician outfit, and Etta as a young lady here in Baltimore. Next slide, please. And we think that their interest in art probably came from the arrival in 1898 of Gertrude Stein to Baltimore. The Steins were from, and I'm sure you've heard of Gertrude Stein, who was an important writer, American writer. Her brother Leo was also quite important to art history in this country. He was super smart. He wrote quite a few books, and was a real intellect, really interested in modern art and connecting it in a new and different way. These are both works from our collection. And when the Steins moved to Baltimore, they did because they had cousins that lived there. And Gertrude came to go to medical school at Johns Hopkins. By the time she arrived in 1897, Hopkins was accepting female students. And her brother Leo also came to go to graduate school at Hopkins. And they both had been in Cambridge, at Harvard, and at Radcliffe. So they moved from the Boston area down to Baltimore in 1897. And it was very, they of course became very important collectors later in their lives. But these were early days. But we think that, next slide, please. They may have played an important role in the beginning of the Cone collection. In 1898, the year after Gertrude and Leo arrived in Baltimore, Etta was given $300 by her eldest brother, Moses, the Cones had great names. The two eldest brothers were Moses and Caesar. Anyway, Moses gave Etta $300. By this point, their father had passed away, so mom was living alone in the brownstone where the family had grown up, and not living alone. She was living without her husband, and Etta was living with her. And he said, why don't you buy something to decorate the family sitting room? So the same room that we saw in that photograph of the two parents, he was thinking she would buy something to kind of dress it up. Etta could have bought a piece of antique furniture. She could have bought a rug. But for some reason, she decided to buy paintings. And she and her sister-in-law, Bertha, went to New York. We don't know how they knew about this artist, but Theodore Robinson, who was a terrific painter, an American Impressionist. He was someone who, I think he grew up in Vermont, was from Vermont, but he moved to France to find Monet, moved to Giverny, stayed there, knew him. There was a whole fan club of American artists that lived in Giverny. Poor Monet was probably, it was like having the paparazzi at his doorstep. But Theodore Robinson was someone that, really learned a lot from him, and was a wonderful painter. But we really don't know why Etta knew of him. But she decided to, she went to the preview, and then at auction, she was going to stay and bid on the works, but got too nervous and asked a family friend to do it instead. And with that $300, she bought 5 paintings by Theodore Robinson, including these two, which are just marvelous examples. And we think were the first Impressionist paintings to come to Baltimore. So it was a really important moment. Next slide, please. The Cones and the Steins became really close friends. A couple years after the purchase, Gertrude and Leo gave up on their studies. They moved, they said, okay, medical school is not for me and graduate school is not for me. And they eventually ended up in Paris, as many of you may know. Gertrude and Leo lived together in an apartment on the Rue de Fleurus, which ended up becoming a really important place for artists and philosophers and thinkers and musicians to gather. They had weekly salons at their apartment, and it was it became a real center for artistic connection. And there are a lot of Americans who, when they would go to Paris, they would try to get an invitation to go to the Steins' apartment, because these were days when you couldn't see works by you couldn't see works by Cezanne or Matisse or Picasso in the museums. This was too avant-garde, it's so funny. We think today we're so spoiled. We get to see this amazing art and it's so easily accessible. And in those days, you really had to fight for it. Anyway, here's some funny images of the girls together in Italy, because they did a lot of traveling, not just in Paris, but in these early years, they were super close friends. And along with Leo Stein, who really took the Cone sisters on their European tour. We're really lucky here at the BMA that we have a lot of their archival papers. We also have their library, including their Baedeker travel guides. So we can look to see where they went, and then they sometimes have check marks, or they underline things or put stars like one would if one really liked something. So it's a really fun thing. Next slide, please. And from this early friendship, it really ended up being these were really essential relationships for the Cones. In 1905, Etta started to spend a lot of time in Paris. Her mother had passed away. She was sort of free to do what she wanted, and was financially comfortable, so that traveling to Europe was not a hardship, other than the 3-week boat ride, which doesn't sound too good. And in 1905, she was in Paris. She and Gertrude were very close at this point. And Gertrude was sitting for her portrait that we see on the left, that's now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And Picasso made her come and sit and model for the portrait many, many times, dozens of times. And it was really boring. And so Gertrude said, well, maybe I'll invite Etta to come with me. She'll occupy me while I'm sitting there in this awkward pose. And she likes art, and maybe there'll be a connection. So she goes with her, she meets Picasso, and from that first visit, Etta does decide, okay, I'm going to support this young Spanish artist who's living in this not very nice studio apartment with probably not running water. And she buys a few works on paper. Then she goes back in a couple weeks with her sister, and they buy a few more things. And by the time the sisters were finished, they had bought over 100 works by Picasso and really knew him. Next slide, please. The same thing happened with Henri Matisse. However, not with Gertrude and Leo's sister-in-law. They had an elder brother named Michael, and he was married to a woman named Sarah, and they were also living in Paris. And they also had weekly salons at their place. The Steins were really such important cultural folks in Paris at this time. And so after seeing that Etta really responded to Picasso, Sarah said, well, I want to take you to see my guy. Like, this is the guy I like more than anybody. And so she took Etta to meet Matisse the following year in 1906. And from that first visit, Etta bought a couple of drawings, not expensive, just a little bit, and then went back with her sister and ended up buying more. And the painting that we see on the right, Yellow Pottery from Provence, was the first painting that she bought by Matisse, painted in 1905. She bought it in 1906. It is I mean, to today's eye, it may not look as radical as it was in 1905 and 1906. It's unfinished. It feels unfinished, but he signed it. It's very abstract. We see a yellow pottery pot or pitcher with a plate with some fruits or vegetables on it, and he hasn't finished painting them. He hasn't really shown you what's behind it. And this was the moment in Matisse's career when when he was referred to as a wild beast or fauve. He and his fellow artists were ridiculed for being too wild and too much. So for Etta to have bought something like this so early was really very brave and bold, and was the beginning of this incredible friendship, which lasted over 50 years. The Cone sisters, as I said before, Picasso, they bought more than 100 works. For Matisse, they bought over 600 works. So it was a really, really important relationship. Next slide, please. In 1907, the Cones went on, just after having met both of those artists, they went on a world tour with their brother Moses and his wife Bertha, where they went all over the world and saw all kinds of interesting places. They were in Asia, they were in Africa, they went to Egypt. And this sort of love of collecting and of having lots of things to both decorate their own homes, but to decorate their really became a great passion. And here we see them on an elephant, which is probably not something we're supposed to do these days, but there you go. Next slide, please. And as I said, they didn't just collect European modernism. They bought all sorts of things. When the younger sister Etta died in 1949, we received 3,000 things from the Cones. Some of it was library books and postcards, but some of it was, they loved Japanese woodblock prints, jewelry. They bought a few things from Africa. There was just lots of beautiful textiles. One of the greatest parts of our really strong textile collection were theirs. They were fascinated by lace, French lace, and lace from Belgium in particular. And it's so funny. We in our archives we can see how much they spent for some, they kept account books. So we can see that their, dollar was 10 times more expensive than a Matisse work on paper. And, but in the same listing, they have stamps and flowers. And, it was just a little budget that they would put together. So it was a fascinating look at a really important moment in American collecting. Next slide, please. The sisters, I just wanted to show you as they aged, they were, really important members of the Baltimore Jewish Society. Claribel continued to research. She was a pathologist, and she traveled. She spent a lot of time in Germany and in Philadelphia doing research. And Claribel and Etta, loved to play piano. And she, at a certain point, really took on being a collector as her profession or her identity. And here we see her, I think on the right in one of her rooms of her apartment. Next slide, please. Now Claribel, as she started to collect when, she really started to buy really later than her sister. Etta was really the sister who put most of the collection together. But she is really known for buying the big, sexy, fabulous paintings. So on the left, we see the Blue Nude from 1907, which is one of Matisse's most famous paintings, most important paintings. This was painted at the end of that fauve period that I mentioned before, when he was referred to as a wild beast. And we think it's very much both influenced by the death of Paul Cézanne, who was his artistic hero the year before he made this picture, just because of the use of that incredible blue, which is a very Cézanne color, as well as the idea of a bather in a landscape. That's a theme that Cézanne explored hundreds of times in paintings and watercolors. But here Matisse has taken his single bather and blown her up to sort of life size. This is a painting that was first owned by Gertrude and Leo Stein. So both sisters would have known it from their apartment. And after they owned it, they finally sold it. There was a period when, Gertrude and Leo stopped living together when Alice B. Toklas, Gertrude's partner, arrived on the scene. And then Leo got his own place, and their relationship never really recovered from that. And they started to sell things off because they didn't really have a source of income. And so the Blue Nude was in a gal was in the galleries after they sold it. It came to the United States for the first time in 1913 for the famous Armory Show, which was an exhibition of European modernism primarily that was organized by some Americans who felt like American audiences who didn't get to go to Paris and didn't get to go to the Stein's apartment and other places were missing out on all of the new innovations and all the new artistic styles. America at that point was always very much, a decade or two behind the Europeans in terms of artistic innovation. And so they arranged for this incredible show. The Blue Nude came, the show was first in New York, then it went to Boston, and then it went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And when our painting, The Blue Nude, was at the Art Institute, the students at the Institute's art school thought she was so horrifying and hideous that they burned it. They burned it in effigy on the steps of the museum, and they had a mock trial for the artist. They just thought this was the worst. And which, and about, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we lent the painting to a big show at the Art Institute. And I wrote in my note back saying, yes, I said, you better be nicer to her this time, because she hadn't been there since. But anyway, so this is a painting that, is really very signature. Eventually it was purchased by an American collector who passed away and then Claribel was able to buy it. We think it was also very much not only influenced by Cézanne, but also by Matisse's interest in African art and African sculpture. He went to Algeria in 1906 and spent a couple weeks there. And so the palm trees that you see in the background and the African violets that you see around the figure may also be a reference to that. So it's a very deep painting with lots of ways to examine it. The painting on the right, the Cézanne Mont Sainte-Victoire, was another painting that Claribel bought the year before this, as she did most of
Are
her.
we on the right slides here?
I don't know.
Yes, we are. She's talking about the Cézanne painting on the right.
Can you not see that?
Do, do,
Is that okay? Was that Priscilla?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's switch to another slide and make sure we're all in the same place. Let's see. And, the sisters not only collected beautiful things by Matisse, who ended up becoming their favorite artist. They also felt like particularly Etta, the younger sister, felt it was important to start adding artists that were important to Matisse to their holdings. So, for example, this beautiful Camille Pissarro from 1880 is one that she added. On the right, we see Matisse's Festival of Flowers from 1922. This is a view of the balcony of his studio. And if any of you have been lucky enough to have been to Nice, it's sort of in the center of town. And every fall, every spring, probably around now, maybe in a couple of weeks, they have a big festival, sort of like the Rose Bowl, where everything is decorated in flowers, and is very, very beautiful. And on the balcony, we see his daughter, Marguerite, who played a very essential role for him, helping him as a model and a studio assistant and a logistics coordinator for a lot of his business. And she's posing with one of his favorite models of the time in the 1920s, a woman named Henriette. Next slide, please. And just showing you some more wonderful things from the collection. Painter in the Olive Grove from 1922. It's the same model. It's Henriette, who was someone that Matisse sort of felt she was sort of like a daughter. She became very close friends with his own daughter, Marguerite, and they spent a lot of time together. And she was a musician, a dancer. He encouraged her to start taking painting lessons. And it's this moment in the 1920s is really the depth of the Cone collection's Matisse paintings. We have 42 paintings by him, and most of them are from this period when he was living in Nice in the south of France. He went there for the first time at the end of 1917. And it was just a visit, and he just fell in love with the place. He fell in love with the light, the color, the atmosphere. And so he spent most of the rest of his life in the south of France in one place or the other. In the early years, he would go back and forth, and there would be a season in Nice and a season in Paris. But as he got older, he ended up spending more and more time in the south of France. On the right, oh, let me just talk about the parakeets a bit. On the right, interior flowers and parakeets. Another great painting from 1924, also from this Nice period. Here again, we see Matisse's studio from the inside. And what's so wonderful about it is the way that he sort of moves us through the space. You know, we start off in what looks like maybe the front hallway, where he's got this a bird cage with two parakeets. And it's so funny. It's like the last thing you see. If you didn't know the title, you would barely know they were there. Um, Matisse loved textiles, and he loved decorative elements. And here we see this beautiful textile on the table. We see a screen in the far distance. We see what looks like maybe a rug hanging from the ceiling that he's tied back, to sort of give you a glimpse into the distance, where we see that window and then the building next door. This is one of Actor Kane's, one that when Etta bought it, Claribel, the older sister, was a little bit jealous because she really liked it. And that's an interesting thing, that each sister bought what they bought what they liked. They had their own money. They got a stipend from their brothers from the textile business that allowed them to travel to Europe to buy things. They couldn't buy anything they wanted, but they could buy a lot. It's funny, we don't have the Cone sisters, picked certain artists, and even though there are people you may think they would have liked, they didn't buy every important artist of the day. For example, Claude Monet. They didn't buy any works by Monet. And I figure it may have also been because he was so expensive. They had to sort of, even in the 1920s, he was selling out shows, and he was a very successful artist at the end of his life. Anyway, next slide. Sorry, Laura. Picasso continued to be of interest, but the sisters, really concentrated more on his works on paper. After that original rush of buying quite a few things from him when Etta and Claribel first met him in 1905, here we see this adorable note that he sent to her, wanting her to come back. This is a self-portrait of Picasso, hat in hand, hoping that Etta will come back to his studio to buy a few more things. On the left is one of the great paintings that she did buy by him, Women with Bangs from 1902 during his blue period. Next slide, please. The sisters, as I said earlier, I think, Etta really began the collection with those Robinsons in 1898. Claribel didn't really get into buying as much until the 1920s. Claribel went to do research in Germany just before the outbreak of World War One. And her brothers rushed to get her a place on a boat to come home before the war really. For reasons that are somewhat mysterious, she rejected the stateroom she was given because it wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't like how she usually traveled. And she ended up staying in Germany throughout World War One, in a hotel. And she somehow, luckily they had family that was based in Switzerland that was able to get her money to pay her bills and keep her, fed. But it was pretty tough. She didn't come back into the United States until 1920. And so the sisters in 1922 went to France and bought a lot of the Matisses that we have now. So most of what Claribel bought was in that chunk between 1922 and 1929. In 1929, Claribel and Etta were both in Switzerland. And Claribel they had a dealer they loved in Lausanne, Switzerland. So they always would go there to see him and see what he had. And while she was there, Claribel got very sick with pneumonia, we think, and passed away very unexpectedly. And Etta rushed to her side. And what's interesting is this beautiful painting by Gustave Courbet, who was a realist artist, who was someone that was very important to Matisse. He actually owned, I think, a couple of works by him. This was the last painting that Claribel bought. Weirdly, we have the receipt, and it's actually dated the day of her death. I have to assume that they found out she died and they wanted to make sure it was paid off right away. I'm not sure. It's a beautiful painting that is always in the first gallery of the Cone Wing, as a sort of bit of and it's a very sort of romantic and somewhat somber painting as you sort of go into the great beyond, and it just seems like the perfect last painting for her to have purchased. When she passed away, she left her collection to her sister, but said very clearly that if the city of Baltimore could learn to appreciate modern art, she'd like the collection to come to the BMA. The BMA had opened earlier that decade, had opened in its current spot that year. And luckily for us, Etta didn't pass away for 20 more years. So we had a bit more time. Next slide, please. But the Cones were super close. They were each other's best friends. Etta kept all of Claribel's letters, which of course her older sister told her she had to do, because she wanted her letters. She sort of said, "My letters to you are my diary." And so we're very lucky that we have all that material here. But here they are, both earlier in their lives and maybe just before Claribel died in 1920s when they were in Switzerland. Next slide, please. And the relationship between the Cones and Matisse really shifted after Claribel's death. Etta was really upset, and obviously, but she really stepped into her own at the same time. And in between sort of 1929 and 1931, Matisse had become pretty close with Albert Barnes, who was the head of the Barnes Foundation, which at that time was outside of Philadelphia. Of course, now it's inside Philadelphia. And Barnes had commissioned him to do this mural of the dance, which is very famous. And so Matisse took on the project, and really loved the idea of doing a big architectural project. A lot of his other friends were starting to get, his friends and colleagues were starting to get these architectural commissions. So he did the mural. Unfortunately, he found out halfway through that he had the wrong dimensions. So he then had to start over again. And so he came back and forth to the United States 3 times during this to just make sure he had the right dimensions, to really see the space, etc. And in town in December of 1930, he decided to come to Baltimore to pay his condolences to Etta after the death of her sister. And so he came to Baltimore. We see him here standing in her apartment. He came for one night. We know, I did a lot of research on his visits for a show we did 4 years ago. And we know that the Baltimore Sun, the local paper, wrote 4 or 5 articles about it. He was one of the most famous artists in the world in 1930. He was on the cover of Life magazine. And so coming to Baltimore was a really big deal. And so, and it was the first time that he really saw everything that Etta and Claribel had put together. Etta kept Claribel's apartment as it was, sometimes putting in her own works of art as she went. As she bought things and needed a little more room or wanted to make a connection, but he really got to see what the sisters had. Next slide, please. And here we see a couple of photos of their apartments, which we're very lucky to have, to sort of see how they sort of decorated, with the combination of things from other parts of the world, old things, new things, that's, sort of a somewhat eclectic, sometimes paintings on top of paintings. The ceilings weren't so high, so the salon hanging didn't go too deep, but it's just a beautiful place to live, and always with fresh flowers everywhere. Next slide, please. And so once this relationship started with Matisse, when it really sort of kicked into high gear after that visit, he realized that if he played his cards right, he could have a major presence in a museum on the East Coast of the United States. And so he then started to save things for Etta, make things for Etta. He wanted to make the collection as good as he could. And I think he hoped that she would give the collection to the BMA. And so it started sort of a new phase. So for example, on the left is one of my favorite work. My favorite Matisse is in the Cone collection, The Yellow Dress, which he started right at the time he was working on the mural at the Barnes Foundation. He worked on this painting for a couple of years. He started it and then took and in the 20s, a lot of the paintings he was making in Nice started to get negative criticism for being too pretty and decorative and not as tough as he had been when he was making things like the Blue Nude. And so he decided to take a 3-year hiatus from, and he worked on the mural for the Barnes Foundation, and he worked on his first illustrated book. And he just sort of tried to, like when we unplug our computers to start them, to try to jumpstart them, like he was just trying to take a break. And this painting, The Yellow Dress, was the last painting that he made before the break. He worked on it off and on. We're very lucky. We've got 14 photographs of it. I mean, sorry, 14 drawings for it, which is fabulous. So we know how it started. And, hopefully you will all come and see it in real life, because I don't know if your computers can get very close, but like you can see he did a lot of changes directly on the canvas. You could see that her arms changed. You can see that shoulder expanded, and she actually went from a much smaller figure to a bigger figure as he worked on it over the course of 2 years. And as we see on the right, here is the beautiful Lisette Loengard wearing the dress. I think the hat was one that was made by Matisse's wife. And Etta, after the death of her sister, she started to do her annual trips to Europe again after a year or two. And so in 1932, she came to Nice, and in the late 20s and into the 30s, every time Etta and Claribel would go to France, they would go to Nice and see Matisse and buy from him directly. And he would save things for them, or, he would put out what was available, but not everything, and sort of try to, put them in a certain direction of what he thought they might be interested in. So when Etta went in 1932, she was able to purchase the yellow dress. I think he might have wanted to keep it himself for a while, as he often did, but he didn't have much because he had taken that hiatus from painting. She came back again in 1933, and he really had nothing to sell her. So instead, he asked to come back and sit in this spot and wear this dress and hat as a sort of tableau vivant when Etta showed up. And Etta just was beyond thrilled. It meant so much to her. And she seemed to have been okay with not acquiring a work of art during that visit. Next slide, please. After the hiatus, the next painting that Matisse made was Interior with Dog, that we're also very lucky to own, which features the same flooring and wall covering that we saw in the yellow dress. This painting is much larger, and you can really see how the sense of space has changed. And this was the result of the mural project. Matisse all of a sudden was working on a much bigger scale. And so when he went back to oil painting, he just made a much bigger painting and really got to get a lot of that, sort of changed the way that he was looked at easel paintings in this incredible painting. This is a dog that had once been his son, Pierre's, who showed up for a visit with Dad. His name's Rowdy. He's a Schnauzer. He is the least rough-coated Schnauzer I've ever seen. He looks more like some kind of a seal. But that's what you get to do when you're an artist. And Matisse took one look at Rowdy and was like, I think that dog needs to stay here, Pierre. And so Pierre lost his dog, but Matisse gained a really wonderful studio companion. This is another highlight of the collection. In addition, at the same moment, thank you, Laura, Etta decided she wanted to make a book, sort of memorializing her sister, but also showing the world what they had done. And I think after her sister's death, she gained a lot more confidence. And so during this period, she asked Matisse if he would make a posthumous portrait of Claribel. So she sent him some photographs, and he was working on it. He wasn't someone that really liked commissions, so he always took a really long time. As you see, this drawing project took 3 years. And so in the end, and at some point during it, he or one of his kids got in touch with Etta and said, could you send some photos of yourself too? I think next slide we may have that. Oh, there it is. And so in the end, Matisse ended up sending her 10 drawings, 10 portraits, 4 of Claribel, 6 of Etta as a present. And this was like really a part of them working and really collaborating in a really new way. And so this is this is, I think, a photograph taken by Pierre Matisse in Etta's hotel in Paris. And then what came of it here on the right, 1 of 6. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, Etta continued to buy works of artists that were in Matisse's, she really wanted to provide a context for him. And so artists like Renoir, who loved, and this beautiful Gauguin, Woman of the Mango, which had once been owned by Edgar Degas, that became available in the 1930s, and Etta was able to scoop it up, thank God, because it's one of his most beautiful Tahitian pictures, I think. Next slides. But don't tell people at the MFA I said that. And Etta also was she was the sister who bought most of the collection. She loved every aspect of Matisse's work, his sculpture, his drawings. Here are 2 beautiful examples of really major works that are featured in our galleries all the time. And a lot of people don't know that he was a sculptor, but he made about 80 different sculptures, with multiple casts of each. Each cast is a little bit different. So although they are multiples, they are still very much unique in terms of patina and metal count. But these are 2 beautiful examples from early and later in his career. Next slide. And she loved his drawings. And she put together one of the most beautiful graphic collections by Matisse in graphite, black ink, all sorts of things, as well as lots and lots of his prints. Next slide, please. Also during this period, Matisse got in touch with her, and I'm talking so much, I don't know how much time we're going to have for the study room, but that's what happens when you get me going. Matisse wrote her a letter in 1935 and said, I just wanted you to know I'm working on a painting of a large reclining nude, and I thought you'd be interested in seeing some of my photos. So we sent her a letter, including these photos that we see here. The one on the left, the first state of the painting, the one on the right, the 12th state. And you can see how much this figure has changed. Next slide, please. And in the end, after sending her 2 letters, which were a little, he was sort of trying to entice her. He wanted to make sure that she bought the painting on the right, the large reclining nude, which is another highlight of our collection. And so he sent her 2 letters, and he sort of was trying to woo her to make sure she bought it, because I think he made it for her and with her completely in mind. And when she did eventually buy it, because she couldn't, that was so much attention from him, and she really responded well to it. It made her, she then, we know from photographs that she installed it in the same room as her sister's blue nude, and that was really the intention, was that he wanted to redo the blue nude in his new style, and to really show the arc of his career. Next slide. She continued to purchase works by him. These are 2 of the latest paintings. The striped robe on the left and the 2 girls on the right, from 1947. But after 1938, because of Etta was getting older, and also because of the threat of war, she couldn't travel to Europe as much. And so it became really difficult and just much harder to buy works of art in general. If she wasn't going, it was hard to bring these things home. And it was hard for galleries in the United States to get works. But we were very lucky to have these 2 beautiful works. And you see on the right, like this is from Matisse's last gasp of painting, oil painting. As you may know, he had a lot of physical issues. He had cancer. He had some really sort of devastating surgeries. And at the end of his life, he was in a wheelchair. And so the painting on the right is from the last period that he was actually able to make any oil paintings, just as he was starting to work on his cutouts. Etta died in 1949. And unfortunately, just before the cutouts started to be made, so we don't have any cutouts in our collection. But we have lots of other wonderful things, including these 2 paintings. Next slide. What do I have next? I have no idea. And here we see her at the end of her life again, in her apartment. This collection and the collection coming to the BMA really changed the face of the museum and changed the face of the city. This really is what we are, it's really considered the crown jewel of the BMA's collection, and really what puts us on the map. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, here we have some great early installations of it. On the left upper, we see its original installation. It was, Etta died in 1949. She left us some money to build a wing just for the collection. And, it was very sort of typical 50s architecture, a big white box, and just like a huge, big room, which is not so easy for when you want to have a little corner of a couple of works sort of talking to each other. And then on the lower left, we see 1979, where they've added a few more walls to make those connections a little clearer. The floor was made of cork, which I hope we don't ever bring back. And then lastly, and here we see it today, on the lower right. In 2001, we reopened and gave wood floors and sort of made it a little bit more of a elegant and elevated space. So we're very excited. As we said earlier, we opened up the Ruth R. Marder Center for Matisse Studies in December of 2001, and this is our study room. This is a place where we invite folks, scholars, students, groups, classes, individual researchers, and really anybody from the general public that has some sort of research interest to make appointments, and we'll bring out some of our beautiful works on paper that we'll be showing a few of them, hopefully using Laura's iPhone. But it's a beautiful space with the most beautiful table, and a place that people really enjoy coming to. And we also have a very beautiful library. We're lucky to have a lot of bookshelves as a part of the architect's plan. And so our librarian was thrilled that we brought down all of our vast collection of Matisse catalogs to give her some more space. Next slide. Oh, I'm going to go really quick because I know we're running out of time. We have 3 exhibitions on Matisse that are opening next month. So please pray for us that we live through it. The first one is for Tino and Matisse to see this light again. This is a medium-sized show that juxtaposes the work of a young living artist named Louis Fertino with Matisse. Louis went to art school here in Baltimore, is very familiar with the Cone collection. And we love the idea of who Matisse continues to influence long after his death. And so Louis has been a wonderful partner on this project. We allowed him to pick what's in the show, which is kind of fun. And he's very charming, so we got a lot of really nice things that normally might be upstairs in our normal Cone galleries. And I'm co-curating the show with our Virginia Anderson, who is our senior curator of American painting and sculpture, who actually taught Louis when he was in art school. Next slide. And Louis, what's interesting, he loves Matisse's paintings from the 1920s. He loves his odalisques and interiors. He looks at it from his own, he is a queer man who shows a lot of his intimate life in his own paintings, and really sees Matisse as a way to express himself, to inspire him to express himself fully and truly. So Laura and I have been really excited about this show in particular. Next slide. And then a week later, we opened the exhibition Matisse and Martinique Portraits and Poetry, which was curated by Denise Murrell, who was a curator at the Met, as you can see, but was a fellow in the Matisse Center for a few years, where she is looking at images that Matisse made, particularly from this book by John Antoine Now, Poésies Antillaises, that looks at poetry that Now wrote about the Caribbean. Next slide. Matisse, in making the book, and in this particular moment, he started to expand the kinds of models that he used, particularly after a lot of trips that he made in the early 30s to Tahiti and to the Caribbean. So we are sort of doing a deep dive into the book and into some associated drawings. as well as looking at some artists from the Caribbean and their depictions of their own homeland. So that show opens in March of 2018. And then finally, 2 weeks after that, we open up Matisse and Vence, The Stations of the which is a mural that we see at right that Matisse made for his chapel project that he made in Vence, very near Nice, at the very end of his life. During World War II, he had to move from Nice to a little town nearby called Vence. And he reconnected with a former nurse and model who had joined the convent there as a nun. And they started talking, and they needed a new chapel. And he was thrilled at the idea of having this commission, and so he ended up designing the whole thing, from the tiles on the roof to the vestments that the priests wore, to the altar, to the lighting fixtures, as well as three black and white tile works and stained glass windows. And that's really what he's best known for, the stained glass windows from this chapel. But this mural of the Stations of the Cross is one that has not gotten very much attention. And so Yves Alain Bois, who's one of the great Matisse scholars, came to us because he really wanted to do a deep dive into this mural and understanding why Matisse made it, how he made it. It turns out he made more than 100 drawings for it. And we can go to the next slide. Here he is with his former nurse and model, who has become Sister Jacques Marie. And there is Matisse in front of a little bit that you can see of the Stations of the Cross mural and the stained glass in 1951. Next slide. And, Matisse really mapped this out. Traditionally, in a Catholic church, you will often have these 14 stations around the church. And as believers, one goes through and prays in front of each of them at certain times of the year, right, Laura?
Correct.
She is my authority on all things Catholic. And so Matisse began this first in just a little notebook where he's literally just sort of sketching out each stage. He then would do them in charcoal, sometimes in ink. And when it gets to the end, he puts so much work into it, and they become very spare designs, more like graffiti. And he ends up, he didn't have room for 14 stations, so he just does them all on one panel, and they're all numbered. And you sort of go on a serpentine path to follow the journey that Christ made towards his crucifixion. Next slide.
We call it more of a pilgrimage.
Not a journey.
It's not a journey.
For him, it was, though.
Oh, for him, it was not a good journey.
Yes.
It was a pilgrimage.
So here we see him falling, in one of the most beautiful drawings for as part of this project that we see in the middle, and then Laura has put a little oval where it ends up. Next slide. And there he is dying on the cross. And again, you see how he gets very, very spare. And he hired a model to model this, which I just can't imagine how that would have felt. But he had to rely on, he had been raised Catholic, but was not religious, and had to rely on a lot of religious figures associated with the project to sort of help him figure out what to do. He also wasn't in good shape physically, and so he couldn't go to other churches, and he did a lot of his research from library books and images that he was sent by people. Last slide. And there we go. So that's a bit about us and a bit about the Cone Sisters and the BMA. And now we're going to transition for a quick view of some things in the center, so you can feel like you're with us, hopefully.
Great. And during this brief pause, while Laura gets her phone out and shows us some things, I'm just going to make a quick plug for our next event, which will be on Thursday, February 26th at 11 a.m., called Provenance Research, Uncovering Life Stories of Works of Art. Victoria Reed, who is the Bettina Burr Chair for Provenance at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, will be our speaker. And if you haven't registered, we put the link in the chat, and the program is free of charge. So hope to see you on the 26th online. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat.
I think I have to stop screen sharing. One moment.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, here we go. We're going. Okay. It's not, there we go.
Wow. Okay, everyone see?
And you can hear us fine?
Lovely, lovely.
So here we are in the center. And this is how the center would look if you had made an appointment to come and see some Matisse works up close and personal. And Katie's going to show you some of our favorites.
Hi, everybody. I hope this works. We're going to run down. We've got 5 works on paper. The first one was actually one of the first things that Etta Cone ever bought by Matisse. This is a watercolor, which is very rare. He didn't make a lot of them, and he really only made them very early in his career during his Fauve period when he was really playing with lots of bright colors. And this is a view of a harbor. And as you can see, he just uses the sort of most delicate touch and the littlest amount of medium, really. Watercolor is such a tough medium to use because you can't go back and fix it. And he was someone who often had to go back and rethink things. But we're very lucky to have it. It's very rarely on view because the color is so fugitive, and we think it's in pretty good shape because it hasn't been shown much, at least here, but it's a lovely, lovely work, made in 1905 and probably purchased in 6. So a great one to have and unusual. And then we move down the run here to 2 different prints and 2 different print making techniques that Matisse was looking at in 1906. The one on the left is a lithograph, and the figure is very spare. He's really sort of playing with the female figure in the most sort of simple and somewhat sort of abstract way. A very beautiful work. In 1906, Matisse was sort of trying to figure out what kind of artist he was going to be, and this is a work that very much looks at other artists exploring, a real kind of simplification that he never quite went to. He never went completely abstract. So it's a beautiful work, and one that we use a lot in the center because it feels very modern and very sort of contemporary in a way. And then at the same time, he made this beautiful woodcut. And this was during, as I said earlier, I think, he was really interested in African art and interested in the way that African artists looked at the female body that's so different from a Western view, where everything is so idealized and perfect. What was interesting is that he made 4 woodcuts. And of course, to make a woodcut, he actually has to sculpt wood, which is a little bit like what the African artists were doing. And this is known as the large woodcut. It's very beautiful. Again, the female figure here, she's pretty spare, but she's sort of surrounded by so much sort of decorative elements, dots and lines, and you sort of feel her really, really sort of throbbing in a way, and full of excitement. A really beautiful work, one again that we use a lot in the center. Woodcuts are one of the easy, and I should really start off by saying, Matisse loved printmaking. He loved all sorts of art making, painting, sculpture, drawing, printmaking, illustrated books. He was always making prints, and he was very, very, he loved playing, and art making, it inspired him for a very long career. But he really loved the idea after a certain point of providing everyone out, anyone, his paintings were expensive, and he liked the idea of providing other ways for people to get to own things by him. For example, this beautiful lithograph, which very much reads as though it's as some kind of a crayon drawing, made in the 20s. This is during the period when he was doing a lot of paintings and drawings and prints that looked at this theme of the odalisque, a sort of quasi-Eastern Mediterranean fantasy, which, he certainly knew was a fantasy. And this was very much a part of, I think he always said it was a way for him to make nudes without making them feel more real. And I don't know if I said this earlier, Matisse loved textiles and decorative items. He had an incredible group of costumes and dresses and things to sort of dress up his models as part of his working process. And here it looks like she's got a little bit of a sheer top and some jewelry. And this, I think, was again his favorite model from that time, Henriette, who very much always liked to do was very open about dressing up in some of the clothing for his paintings of odalisques. And then finally, one of our favorite drawings that what is associated with a painting called The Blue Eyes in our collection. This is a woman named Lydia, who came into Matisse's life in the mid-1930s, I think originally as a nurse for his wife. And she ended up being so capable and fabulous for him that she sort of took over the studio. She helped him find models. She modeled him herself. Unfortunately, it led to the breakup of his marriage, and Lydia became his companion for the rest of his life after this period. And this is a beautiful drawing of her. He always liked this pose of a model sort of self-embracing. And this is a particularly beautiful example. And you can see, Matisse at a certain point, particularly in his sort of mature career, really liked the idea of viewers seeing his creative process. I mean, this is a graphite drawing that's just filled with erasures and marks that have been removed and added, and it really adds so much depth and content. And I know it may not be easy to see because of our although fabulous camera. In working on it, we know that he became so excited about the drawing that he ended up adding a strip of paper at the top and a strip of paper at the bottom and gluing it or taping it behind so that she could be her full self, because he had started her as a certain size and then she just took over and got bigger and bigger. So again, a real highlight from 1936. At the moment when he and Etta were very close, and he was selling her and she was acquiring some of his greatest drawings of this period. And we just wanted to show you our beautiful library. If you ever get to come to Baltimore and you want to learn more about Matisse, we have lots and lots of catalogs about him, about the Cone sisters, we have been surprised how many scholars have actually had to come to Baltimore to use our library. For us, it was really saving space for our main library upstairs, and we thought it'd be nice for us. We've had a lot of local researchers come and just want to find books that they can't find anywhere else. So that's been a real delight and a surprise. Anyway, that sort of wraps up our program. Thank you so much. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Priscilla. And we could go back to our computers if you want to ask us any questions. Otherwise, you are free to have lunch.
There are two in the chat. I can read. One is from me. Who is Ruth Marder?
Oh, that's a good one.
For who the Matisse collection is named now.
Ruth Marder was from Baltimore, a big supporter of the BMA. And she passed away a few years ago. And her executor, she loved Matisse, she loved the BMA, and her executor came to us and said, we want to fund something in her honor. And so they were so generous and allowed us to take this space and make it so beautiful. We have a little gallery outside as well, where we've had Matisse shows rotating, or they're not always just Matisse. It's Matisse always plays a role. And we've had a series of shows since we opened in 2021. So that's, yes, so that's who Ruth Marder is.
And does the BMA have any interiors of the Cone sisters?
What do you mean?
Things from their apartments?
Oh, yes, yes.
Furniture.
Yes,
Furniture?
yes. Furniture,
And-
yes. So yes, we have 3,000 things. We have their
Oh,
furniture.
wow.
I mean, it's funny, like we didn't, in 1949, after Etta died, the family and her executor and the museum staff went through everything that was still in the apartments. And decided what was museum worthy, what was family stuff, and maybe what they donated. So we don't have bedroom furniture, but we had her piano. No, we didn't get the piano, stayed in the family. We have lots of furniture, textiles. So they just sort of we made a decision.
Trinkets.
There are jewelry, and there were a lot of prints and 6 sculptures by Matisse that were duplicates because each sister had them. And so there is a little cone collection in Greensboro, North Carolina at the Weatherspoon Art Museum, which was where the family business, where the textile business was located. And so in her will, she said anything that the BMA doesn't want that's museum quality, I'd like to go to them. So there are a few things down there. So they have a gallery of cone material that they, and we've collaborated with them on various things.
And also upstairs in our galleries, we have one gallery that's kind of dedicated to like a little vignette of their apartment with some of their furniture, some of their paintings. And then we have this virtual tour of that, that was created to have people walk through their apartment. If you press like the button on the screen, you can walk through their apartment through old photographs and see like where the paintings were hung.
And are their apartments still existing and people living in them? They're still
Yep.
there.
The building exists. They've been cut up into very small units, so you no longer have these, 8 or 10 room beautiful units. But yes, the virtual tour that Laura is talking about was done for us by the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, for and it was done by their imaging research department. It was a class. So it was done by all of these like 20-year-old kids, which was amazing. And they went downtown and they found the floor plans, and they were able to get onto the 8th floor of that building in 2000. So we have views out of the window, and now it's 26 years old, but then, it was more accurate than it would have been otherwise. And so that was it was a lot of work, but it was a fabulous project. And, it's getting, it was made, it's a touch screen. But it also, if you don't touch it, it sort of goes, sort of becomes like a film. But it's 25 years old now. So we need to update it with new technology. It probably will be a lot easier. That's a way for people to really understand how they lived, for those who aren't as interested in the art itself, but to sort of see what it was like living in Baltimore in the 20s. The apartment has now become an apartment for senior citizens in Baltimore.
It's interesting.
And we have a security guard who retired, who moved there. So I gave him a book to bone up on so that he can be the expert in the building.
The resident expert, right?
Yeah.
Well, now we need to go to Baltimore. We will.
I know. We got to book a tour, kids.
We're very excited about coming.
It's
Oh,
so
good.
unbelievable.
Let us know.
We will. Well, this is fabulous. So thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Thank you,
Pleasure.
guys.
Yeah.
Have
Thanks
a
for
good
your interest.
afternoon. Stay warm.
Stay warm too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see
Wonderful.